I never wonder why people are ill. I only ever wonder why people are still well.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrada-Gore. Today, our guest is Philip Weeks. Philip is one of the leading natural health experts in the UK. He is a master herbalist, registered acupuncturist, and naturopath. He has studied a variety of approaches to wellness all around the world, and he has a real knack for communicating important health concepts in terms that are both easy to understand and easy to apply to our lives. Before diving into the conversation, I want to pause and thank our sponsors. The Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, ensuring access to good food and protection for the growers and eaters at farmtoconsumer.org. And Free and Healthy Children International, offering a safe alternative to vaccination. Visit freeandhealthychildren.org. And the Weston A. Price Foundation, dedicated to restoring nutrient-dense foods to the diet through education, research, and activism at westonaprice.org. Now listen in on our conversation recorded at the Wise Traditions Conference in Anaheim last fall. So Philip, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to start right off the bat by challenging you. You've written a book entitled Make Yourself Better. That's a big claim and a title. What's the reality? How is this supposed to happen?
I mean, essentially, I suppose what I've learnt on over the years doing natural medicine is that fundamentally the body knows what it needs to do to get well. But for that to happen, we need to do basic things. We need to eat the right kinds of foods. We need to get rid of the right kinds of toxins out of our body. We need to live a certain lifestyle. So my whole aim with what I do is to help patients to empower themselves fundamentally with their lifestyle and changes in order to optimize the body's ability to repair itself.
So what's step one? I mean, I guess we should get your book, but if we don't, what's step one? What's the first thing to do to understanding your body and improving your health?
I mean, the first sort of factor that I discuss is about constitution, because everybody's different. So we all know people who can eat what they like, drink what they like, smoke what they like, and they're really well. And other people, they have to eat pure food, have a perfect lifestyle, and even then they're only just okay. So fundamentally in natural medicine, it's understanding that we're all different. And I know that's obvious, but in Western medicine, that isn't necessarily seen as something that's obvious. So the first step to recovery or being at our optimum health is fundamentally knowing that we're different. And there's different constitutional types in different medical systems around the world. There's different ways of understanding biotypes, different body frames, different outlook in life, different ways our body process different nutrients. And of course, some of the most interesting advances recently are on testing our genetics, testing genetic SNPs, of course, how our genetics change according to our environment, whether genes turn on or off. So we understand that our genes aren't our destiny, but they're very important for understanding what we need to be well. So that's the first step, is understanding ourselves more, what our constitutional health is, and then our lifestyle should be aligned with our body type.
Interesting. So, for example, when you talk about constitution, I have a friend who catches colds all the time. So how she chooses to improve her health may be different than what I choose to do when I'm generally at a different place, right?
Correct. And you taking the same kind of nutrients, eating exactly the same diet wouldn't necessarily work for both of you.
Right.
There's obviously fundamental principles, there's fundamental truths around lifestyle, but still we're all different. I suppose that's the first area that I kind of discuss with patients, is that you can't compare yourself with somebody else.
Oh, that sounds like such a relief, because I know people who are constantly looking at other people and thinking, why are you so slim, or why are you so well? And there's this internal even condemnation, like, why can't I be like that person? Well, maybe their body type is quite different from that other person's genetically.
Correct. So we have different gifts. We all have different gifts, but they're not all the same. So, I know a patient of mine, and she's probably in her mid-70s now, and she's incredible. She only needs 5 hours sleep at night. She's up in the morning. She does loads of things. She has loads of energy. And there's other people who are not like that. Now, everybody goes, I wish I was like her. You're not going to be like her. You're just going to be yourself.
Yes.
So it's understanding your own body, the way that you work, and then making the best out of that.
Uh-huh.
But as soon as we start comparing ourselves with other people and thinking we should be more like that, it's really a road to disease in many ways.
Right, because actually our attitude affects our health as well, correct?
Sure. I mean, it's complex. Health is so many different factors. It's not just our food and our lifestyle. It's also our beliefs and our emotions and our connections with people in the world and community and all these different things. So all of these factors are very important for our well-being.
Yes, if you have a bad relationship with a spouse, you feel that in your stomach, right? Your stomach is tied up in knots. You can't even enjoy your food, so your digestion, everything's tied together, like you're saying.
Well, our emotional well-being and our mental well-being isn't separate than our physical being. You know, we can, I test patients' cortisol levels, for example, to see the levels of stress and how well their adrenal glands are functioning. And you know, emotional stress affects the body biochemically in the blood in the same way than physiological stress. The brain doesn't really recognize the difference. So we are a very complex blend of our emotions, our spiritual well-being, our physical well-being. All of these things come together. So one of the most amazing things I wonder about is I never wonder why people are ill. I only ever wonder why people are still well. You know, with our environment, with our food, with all the challenges that we have, it's incredible how well people are considering all those things.
The resilience of the human body,
It's
right?
extraordinary.
It really is. Okay, so step one, understand yourself. Then
Sure.
what?
Then it's intake, so nourishment. What are we supposed to eat? And this is I'm still finishing my master's degree in nutrition, and I've done all kinds of different kinds of training throughout my working life, but it's a confusing question, isn't it? That's why people are here.
Yes.
We could be talking all day to so many different experts around the world about what should we eat, and we get different kinds of answers. So it's a conundrum, but it's also very complex, but it's also very simple. So the simple thing is that we need to eat food.
Got it.
Sounds obvious.
Yes.
It sounds obvious, but that's not what's happening anymore. You know, what is added and is classified as food isn't really food. The additives, the chemicals, the kinds of preservatives that are added. I mean, if you think about we really should only be eating food that we can make at home. Food that our grandmother, our grandfather would have understood as food.
Yes.
But if you go home and somebody says, oh, can you go home and make some margarine? You're going to be like, well, I need this, and I need this chemical, I need this. It's not possible.
Uh-huh.
So fundamentally, we have to begin to start eating food. Is it something we can make at home? Can we make textured soya protein at home? No, you can't. So why should we be eating it? So without getting too complicated, the fundamental thing is we need to be eating simple foods, that stuff we can make at home, stuff we can prepare ourselves, and that's the first level. And then we can go into more detail about, you know, what kinds of fat should we be eating. Of course, we're at the Western Enterprise Conference, and you know that there's a lot of debate about what kinds of fats we should be eating. But again, if you look at traditional cultures and the kinds of foods they eat, they're eating, you know, some saturated fat for sure. They're eating a variety of fats. So, you know, many of the patients I see have become ill as a result of our low-fat food recommendations through the years.
And why do conventional doctors continue to push the low fat?
There's lots of reasons. I mean, the initial studies years ago about how cholesterol is caused by saturated fat. If you think the number one cause of death in the Western world is heart disease, and there is a correlation, people who have heart disease tend to have furrowing of the arteries, hardening of the arteries, high cholesterol. So therefore heart disease is associated with high cholesterol. Then they analyze food. Well, some food has cholesterol in it. Mm-hmm. It has saturated fat. Therefore, saturated fat causes heart disease. So that's where it began. And that myth is continuing. It is much more complicated than that.
Because Alan Keyes, the scientist who came out with this kind of revelatory 7-country study,
correct,
I believe he did say at some point, the cholesterol that we ingest through food does not go into our bloodstream. Is that correct?
Well, it's a complex situation. However, not a high saturated fat diet doesn't necessarily result in high cholesterol in the blood. In fact, some people are thinking that cholesterol is more related to inflammation, that if you have inflammation in the body will be producing its own cholesterol in order to have an anti-inflammatory effect. Fat in itself is anti-inflammatory. However, fat on our body, so central adipose tissue, that's the fat around our belly, that is inflammatory, and we know that a high carbohydrate diet can increase triglycerides and cholesterol. It's also the blend of cholesterol in the body. There's also something called oxidized cholesterol, so people can have a low overall cholesterol count, but if the cholesterol is oxidized, that's more dangerous than even having a high cholesterol in your bloodstream and low oxidation. It's much more complicated than fat equals heart disease. We know that's no longer the case.
Interesting. And it's true. I actually have heard and read more studies coming out in the mainstream media that fat is no longer the culprit.
Correct.
Which is encouraging.
It is encouraging. But there's still this myth that you need to have low-fat foods.
Right.
Have a yogurt, but make sure it's low fat, or have milk. I mean, how much percentage fat is in milk anyway? You're talking 4%. I mean, what's going on, in a sense? So I think that the high carbohydrate diet, sugar is much more an enemy to us than fat. Obviously, there's different kinds of fat. There's one thing about having healthy saturated fat, but recently, in the last couple of weeks, there's been studies showing that heating up vegetable oil creates oxidation in the body, which could be carcinogenic. So vegetable oils, in some sense, cause more problems than saturated fat.
The name of it, vegetable oil, to me always sounded, it sounds so healthy.
It sounds wholesome. It's vegetables, right?
Exactly.
What can be wrong with vegetables? But it's like how they process these vegetables, isn't it? The oil in vegetables. So essentially, I recommend butter. I recommend saturated fat. I use a lot of ghee in my clinic. I recommend people have that. There's levels to it. The colder the climate, the more saturated fat we need. So depending on the climate somebody's living in, Inuits are eating a diet that's incredibly high in fat. Some areas 70% is fat, almost like a ketogenic diet. Well, that's not going to be helpful in California. Mm-hmm. It's hot. We don't need that much saturated fat compared to what they need. So the genius of Weston A. Price, when he traveled around the world looking at all these different cultures, and of course other medical anthropologists as well, since going to different tribes, what is it that these people are doing? It's all according to place, time and circumstance. So everything's individualized in that. So there's some basic things. We need to eat food. We do need to have saturated fat. We shouldn't be eating refined carbohydrates, but it's all according to where we're living as well.
So interesting. So we need to understand ourselves and the food we're taking in and our environment. I hadn't thought about that.
It's all connected, because I suppose what happens is that the societies that we're living in disconnect us from our environment. If you ask children where certain foods come from, they don't know where they're from. So there's a disconnect between food that's growing and it coming onto our plate and how that occurs. But we don't live in a bubble. We live according to our environment. I was in Shanghai a couple of weeks ago. I go to different places in the world. I collect remedies, and I was in China. And being in Shanghai is so shocking, the amount of pollution.
Yes.
The amount of pollution there, and you can see what happens when a society disconnects from their environment to economic and social policy and health policy. There's no connection anymore. Of course, in ancient China there was.
Yes.
So we can't live in a healthy way without being aware of our environment. And of course, it's all connected.
Absolutely. Well, I was thinking about what you were saying a moment ago about simple foods. A friend of mine told me recently, when you eat a food that has preservatives, it's trying to keep the food intact. But when we try to digest food, the objective is to break it down and activate the nutrients, get them into your body. So the preservatives are fighting our body's digestive process, right?
Yes, in a sense, processed, refined foods that are commercially available are designed not to be consumed. They're not designed to be consumed by bacteria. They're not designed to be consumed by fungus. They're not designed to be consumed by organic life, and then we're eating them.
It's like they're not live products anymore, right?
They're not anything that we can recognize. The ingredients in them aren't food. So, you know, it's going back to the basic principles, isn't it, of what we can make at home. And then we can we can drill down into more detail. Because if you think about, you know, what's happening is there's this huge issue with gluten. Mm-hmm. You know, gluten used to be a food that many people would have and it would be okay, but I'm seeing, like many clinicians, an increase in not just celiac disease but non-celiac gluten intolerance. So we're getting to a point where many people don't do well if they consume gluten. It becomes inflammatory, it aggravates neurological tissue. So anyone with an autoimmune disease, anyone with a neurological disease fundamentally needs to avoid gluten. So it's getting complicated about what on earth we should be eating.
Now let's pause for a moment to thank our sponsors, the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. Want to help have your farmers back? Worried about your access to nutrient-dense foods or your ability to grow your own? Support the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. We defend the right and freedom of farmers, homesteaders, producers, and consumers to grow, obtain, share, exchange, and sell nutrient-dense, local, and artisanal foods in the courthouse, the legislative house, the field house, and your house. The Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund is there for growers and good food eaters, ensuring access to and protection for all parties. Join today, farmtoconsumer.org. And parents, are you concerned about vaccine side effects? Free and Healthy Children International offers a simple, safe, and effective way to reduce infectious disease in your family: homeoprophylaxis. Free and Healthy Children International supports research and access to homeoprophylaxis, the vaccine alternative. Visit freeandhealthychildren.org to find a practitioner in your area. And the Weston A. Price Foundation. Confused about nutrition? The Weston A. Price Foundation sets the record straight. Find out why butter is a health food, why soy foods are not your friend, and why optimal health is found in the wise traditions of our ancestors at westonaprice.org. Now let's return to the program. So we understand ourselves and the environment. The food we take in should be real food, not overly processed and packaged so that it's no longer good for our bodies. What else should we do to make ourselves better?
So then the next step then is around detoxification. So our grandparents would have lived in a planet that was organic. It was organic. And now we're no longer in on that planet anymore. We're on a planet where we are full of all kinds of different chemicals and toxins. And I do different kinds of blood tests. We even do fat biopsies and send them to the labs and test them. And we find all kinds of things. Most patients, I've never come across a patient who doesn't have some kind of environmental poisoning, maybe very low level, but everyone has something. But the most common things are plastics, phthalates, things like bisphenol A, which is a xenoestrogen that they add into plastic to make the bottles harder, that affects our hormonal systems. I find heavy metals, I find you name it.
No wonder you're in wonder that we're surviving, right? Because
Correct.
You see all the effects of the toxins in our bloodstream and
Yes.
these tests you run.
Yes, and it causes all complications because what happens is that there used to be a time where the kind of diseases people that our grandparents would get, like type 2 diabetes, people who are elderly, where their bodies are kind of wearing out, the kinds of diseases they would have, those diseases are no longer affecting our grandparents. Those are the kids. Those diseases are affecting the children, our children now. So type 2 diabetes would be something that would happen to somebody in their 70s, maybe their 60s, 50s if they're unlucky. And now you've got kids who are 15 who are developing type 2 diabetes, 10 who develop type 2 diabetes. There are children who've got heart disease in America at 7 years old. So diseases that would affect people because of aging. We're aging earlier. The reason we're aging earlier is because we've got oxidative stress because of our environmental pressures and toxins. The body is wearing out at a young age.
You were talking about the organic environment. It just made me think people who live and work on farms seem healthier, perhaps because they're less exposed to all the toxins of those of us who are in the city and surrounded by different things. Is that right, do you think?
Well, in some senses, if they're in organic farms, but of course, when I treat, I have a practice in the countryside as well in England, and I treat quite a lot of farmers who are now exposed to all kinds of chemicals, organophosphates, are getting problems as a result of that. And when I do blood work on them, I find all kinds of pesticides, insecticides I need to clean out. So it used to be a time, of course, there's something about doing hard labour,
Yes.
because you're sweating and you're getting
sunshine.
rid of... Exactly, there's some good parts to that. So I don't think there's any safe haven. It's not being paranoid.
No.
Because you can get, I go through periods of time of despair. I'm testing these things and I'm going, my goodness, what do I do with this individual?
Yes.
However, the body will detoxify itself, but we need to encourage it. We need to give it opportunity. And there's lots of ways we can encourage the body to detoxify. So that's taking certain kinds of foods. I'm a real advocate of intermittent fasting, where you spend certain weeks, certain days of the week, where you reduce the amount of food you eat to change the way your body is working. We do liver flushing and using herbs and cleansers and all kinds of things to try and get rid of these toxins. And so there are ways, but you have to be conscious of it and be doing it ever so often.
Interesting. It reminds me, I teach fitness as a hobby, and we change up the exercises because if you don't, your body becomes accustomed to a certain movement and you're no longer challenging it and strengthening it in the same way. So I guess the intermittent fasting also in a way surprises your body.
It's the same thing exactly with exercise as well. There's this idea of neuroplasticity. So if you do that, you have to have routine in some ways, but you have to have variety as well. It's like walking home. If you're walking home from work, choose a different route every day. Try and encourage neuroplasticity. We know if we do that, that can help with people with pain, for example. Changing your routine, doing intermittent fasting, changing the way that you live, in some ways is very, very helpful. So there used to be a time when people didn't have to worry about detoxification. I think everyone has to worry about that now. Everybody has to do something ever so often. And even in ancient times, these ancient cultures all had something. They did either fasting as part of a religious, as a part of a spiritual thing. This was part of every culture in the world. So it's not new.
But honestly, when I hear about try my 7-day detox and you're supposed to buy these juices, it seems like a scam to me.
Sure.
It seems to me, like you said, the body should be able to do it itself. Why can't the body do it itself? You're not scamming me, are you?
I'm not selling you anything, that's for sure. Okay, so I think the issue is that there was a time when the body only was exposed and processing toxins that it was used to. So we have toxins that come from inside our body, so urea and ammonia and all kinds of things that are normal CO2, normal waste products. These are called metabolic waste products that are a natural part of what the human body produces. But now we're exposed to chemicals that in our history of the world we've never been exposed to. So in the last 100 years, we were exposed to some 8,000 chemicals. Some of them we've never been exposed to in the history of mankind. In millions of years, we've never been exposed to. So we haven't evolved or adapted to be able to cope with those things over a slow period of time. So why would the body be able to do that stuff? It doesn't.
Our body needs help.
Our body needs help. So it's not about buying health products and buying more supplements, and I'm really not into that. Fundamentally, a lot of what we can do is through food. A lot of it we can do with sweating. I'm a real fan of using saunas or using exercise to get people to sweat. We know that works. We know that's one way of reducing toxins, the toxic load in the body. If we have excess weight, we need to lose that excess weight. That needs to happen. Specifically weight around our belly, the central adipose tissue. That is where our body stores a lot of these fat-soluble toxins. So we often need to lose weight in order to get rid of some of those toxic metals and toxic chemicals that are stored in our fat cells.
Otherwise, our body may become sicker with a chronic disease of some sort.
Correct. So what we're seeing is that we've replaced acute disease. We're good with acute disease. Western medicine is fantastic. If you have a car accident, there's microsurgery, there's incredible things, incredible advancements that have occurred in modern medicine. But most of the health burden that happens now isn't with acute disease, it's with chronic disease. So with acute disease, the whole design of it is that, do you have malaria or not? Do you have an infection or not? Is this working or not? That's all very well because there's a drug for this and there's a drug for that. With chronic disease, patients rarely have one isolated symptom. They'll have eczema and maybe eczema and psoriasis and headaches and migraines and irritable bowel and asthma. And so what's happening in Western medicine, they're giving a drug for every single symptom. So rather than prescribing a drug for every single symptom, why don't we look at fundamentally what's occurring? So it might be that all of those symptoms are related to a single event that's going on in the body. It might be a nutritional deficiency, it might be an issue with the gut, it might be an issue around lack of detoxification. So we can no longer prescribe medication for every single symptom an individual has, because with chronic disease, as they're getting more complicated, you'd be on so many different drugs, which many people are. So to simplify that, we need to find how do we promote the body's natural ability to repair itself. And it could be said that almost all chronic disease is a disease of inflammation, whether that's Alzheimer's or dementia, or whether it's cancer or inflammatory bowel disease. It's all related to inflammation.
I've heard that. And so what does that mean? What's causing the inflammation?
Well, often it's oxidative stress, so the body is struggling with the amount of free radicals it's dealing with, whether that's oxidative stress because of environmental toxins, because simply we don't have the right fuel. People are eating high amounts of sugar. We know that high sugar intake increases the amount of insulin, and high insulin can affect the immune system. There's something called the Th1 and Th2 balance, which is part of the immune function. When that goes out of balance, the body can't resolve its inflammation anymore, and that creates all kinds of different conditions. So it all kind of comes back to the same stuff again and again.
And so, okay, after detoxification, let's say we do some things, is there another step?
So then I talk about activation movement. Okay, what do we need to do for us to be physically well? We need to move. Now, there could be debates about what kind of exercise is the best. Is it high intensity? Is it yoga? Look, fundamentally, we all just need to move. And there's lots of studies showing the ill effects of sitting down all day. It's a real problem, that people aren't moving enough. But good studies have been shown that simply by walking for 30 minutes 3 times a week has huge health benefits. I think people need to stretch, and I've seen in ancient cultures they do that all in the morning. So exercise really should be done in the morning, and there's good sound reasons for that. That's when our peak cortisol is. We shouldn't have a peak of cortisol in the evening. We want to be exercising in the morning. So I stayed in China for a month at one point and stayed in a Shaolin monastery and stayed with the monks and did all the training with them. And you get up early, you're getting up early, you're doing quite hard physical training, then you do your meditation, then you have then you have breakfast and the day begins. Same in India. I saw that in the Himalayas where yoga's all in the morning and then you get on with your day. So we just need to move. You cannot get well if you're not moving.
And I've heard the best kind of movement is the kind that you're likely to do. In other words, don't force yourself to do something that you don't like. If you enjoy dancing, dance, right? If you enjoy walking, get a dog so you can get out, whatever it takes. But I like that you're saying that all the cultures have some form of movement, and that's the essential thing. It's not about which type you do.
Well, they have movement, but they don't have exercise.
Oh, so interesting.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
You never find them doing exercise. You never go to a tribe and they're like, in the morning they all need to go for a run. It's like living is exercise, isn't it? So whether that's growing things, whether that's creating things, whether that's whatever it may be, and dancing is fundamentally one of the best forms of exercise that any of us can do.
That's excellent. Is there one more step? And then I want to ask you about that wheel of life you had mentioned.
Sure. Well, this fundamentally, all these steps become the wheel of health, essentially.
Oh, the wheel of health.
So they become the wheel. And the next thing I talk about is reserves. So the importance of routine. So routine is really important. So we talked about neuroplasticity and change.
Breaking out of the routine.
But at the same time, you also need a routine.
Really?
Yes. So if you think about... This came to me really when I was talking to some of my older patients who'd lived through the war, and we talk about being stressed now. I mean, people had a lot of stress then. You had bombs raining down in London, so that was stress. What did they do? And they had routine. So I really believe on eating on time. So when you are eating, you should eat on time. So eat breakfast same time every day, lunch at the same time every day, evening meal, go to bed at the same time every day. There should be routine, and within that structure, there should be lots of variety.
Oh, interesting. And what's the benefit of routine?
It stops our adrenals from getting burnt out. It stops us using up our reserves because our whole body works on cycles. So obviously for women that's much more obvious with the monthly cycle, but for us the circadian rhythms, the time we go to bed, the time we go to sleep, all of these, the whole body works on rhythms. So we have to work within the rhythms of our body. We can't work completely erratic lifestyles and be healthy. It's not going to happen. So we need variety, but we also need stability, and we need a structure. And one of the most important principles is getting enough sleep. It's difficult to get enough sleep. We need a minimum of 6 hours. Some people need 8 hours. And one of the things I kind of bang on and on about in my clinic is about sleep hygiene. The importance of not having any lights in the room at night when you're sleeping. I came across a study, and I talked about it in one of my lectures, about that profoundly blind women have half the rate of breast cancer than women who have vision.
Wow.
Half the rate. They think it's to do with melatonin. So melatonin is essential for immune repair and preventing all kinds of chronic diseases like cancer. So the way we get our melatonin, the peak melatonin is at night, and we need to be sleeping in an absolutely pitch black room. No little lights going in the background, no clocks, we shouldn't have a TV anyway, I don't think. Never mind in the bedroom. But the room we're sleeping in should be pitch black in order for us to get enough melatonin. But if we're using bright screens at night, it takes between 1 and 3 hours for the melatonin levels to become normalized. You can fall asleep, but you're not having proper sleep.
Wow. So no wonder also people seem to be having more and more sleep problems, right?
Correct.
And of course they want to pop another pill for that. But your advice is sound. Now, does that make up the whole wheel of health then?
And then the last thing is mind, emotions, and spirituality and connection. How do we connect with the greater world? How do we connect with that's greater with us than us? How do we connect with communities? We know that one of the biggest killers to increase the odds of death, there's all kinds of health risks. We know that obesity increases the likelihood of an early death by 20%. We know that poor air quality by 5%. We know that smoking and all these things. But the biggest risk, almost 40%, is loneliness, isolation. That is the biggest health risk that any of us can actually face.
Wow.
So we can bang on about food and nutrition and lifestyle is all important, but it's connection that keeps us well. And there's all ways of making us connected. Social media is great on one level, but it also can make us more isolated. So it's how do we deal with our emotional world, our connection with other people in our lives, and also about how we deal with all of our difficult emotions. It's difficult being human. We've got a right and a left brain. Mm-hmm. We can't outthink a lot of our problems. We have to feel them. We have to feel grief and anger and irritation and sadness, because if we don't feel those emotions, how are we going to feel joy and connection and all those other things? So,
yeah, and if you tamp them down, you're going to create
it's the Beachball effect, isn't it?
Yes.
You kind of push it under the water, and then eventually it'll come back out again. So we need to be able to feel our emotions, and we shouldn't be feeling happy all the time. It doesn't happen. If you look at our expectations of how we're supposed to feel, we can see that with how many drugs are prescribed, especially in America, with serotonin reuptake inhibitors, so things like Seroxan and antidepressant medication. If we think that 1 in 9 people, I read some statistics, are on antidepressants in America, is that possible? 1 in 9.
Do you think they're just trying to maintain a level of happy emotion that isn't attainable?
I think we're given a framework that's unrealistic. We're given unrealistic expectations that we buy into because our whole society buys into it, and we need more help about creating communities and connection and all of that. That's really where we need help. But also as well is that there's certain things that need to happen for us to file away trauma. So we all have traumatic things that happen to us, but some people find it more difficult to move on from those trauma than other people. And there's lots of studies of why that is, and it's a complicated subject. But there's one theory that REM sleep is very, very important for filing away, as a metaphor, filing away trauma. We've got kind of these virtual filing cabinets in our brain, and we file things away. Oh, that's happened, and it was awful, and it was terrible, and now I'm okay about it, but I'm going to put it away over here. So there's this sort of analogy, and that really only happened in REM sleep. Studies were done on soldiers from the Vietnam War who were still having flashbacks. Those who kept having flashbacks tended to have poor REM sleep. So the question is, how do we encourage REM sleep? They tried medication, they tried all kinds of things, but one of the most effective things are things that are actually free. Dancing can improve REM sleep and help with trauma. Looking at fire, so sitting around a fire can actually stimulate REM sleep. So if you think about tribes, they dance around fires, they have community events when they've had war and famine and children have died, and so it's interesting, isn't it, that maybe there's a connection between what we've done in our ancestry and what we can do now to help us cope with a world which essentially doesn't work well.
Right. Well, I love that you've given us some practical ideas of things we can do to make ourselves better. I know we'd love to continue the conversation or have other conversations with you on future podcasts. Would you like to do that, Philip?
I would love to.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening today. Become a member of the Weston A. Price Foundation for $40 or $25 if you're a student or a senior. Your contribution helps us to get this important health information to people all around the world. Go to our website, westonaprice.org, and click on Become a Member. Again, thanks for listening. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food farming and the healing arts.